So what I'd really like to talk about now is initiating a public relations or a communications plan that's really going to get both the government workers underneath of you as well as the general public in support of a program. What do you think are the most important things to consider? How do you get started? Things of that nature.
Well, there are a couple of key ingredients that I've always found really essential to forming a good PR public policy plan. I think fundamentally, first of all, one has to be grounded in whatever idea it is that you're seeking to promote, okay? And I think that's where personal ideology comes into play. You have to be kind of grounded in your ideas and your beliefs. If you don't believe it, if you don't think that it will work, it's not going to work. You have to be convinced, really as a part of just your inner ideology and where you're centered. You have to believe in the idea that you're promoting. If that belief isn't there, first and foremost, it's going to fail because you're selling a fake product, right? If it's not one you believe in, you can't convince anyone else to believe it. That's the first starting point. The second one that I think is as essential is who are you trying to communicate this message to? To whom are you communicating? We often just think of this kind of nebulous idea of people. Well, I want the public to hear about it. I want people. There are coalitions for everything that you want to achieve. And you have to find your coalition for what it is that you're hoping to accomplish. People who think like you. People who are going to believe that this is a good idea. People who can be convinced that it's a good idea. There is a certain segment of the population, for anywhere in the world, whatever the idea is, even within our own small office here, right? You will never have 100, and I think Abraham Lincoln said it, right? You will never have all the people all the time. It's impossible. It can be the best idea. You know, if you want to give gold bars to every person, somebody will want to know, why isn't it silver? I don't like gold. I like silver better. Or why
that is a very true statement.
You know, I mean, one is being very naive, I think, if you have not done the necessary work to figure out who your coalition is. How are you going to build support for it? It does not matter what it is. You're going to have opponents.
Right.
So know yourself, know your audience, know how you're going to get that 50% that it's going to take, 50% plus one, to get something passed. Or whatever the political division is. Maybe it's a plurality, but know how you achieve that plurality in order to get you across the finish line. From there, then, I think the process of communicating it relies on a couple of, the really sort of 5 tools after you kind of do those other things I talked about. You've got to, first of all, realize that any communication strategy, there is no magic bullet. There is no one way that if you use it again next time, it's going to work. In the same way that you have to build that coalition of supporters for every initiative, you really have to build the communications strategy for every initiative. So realize, first of all, if you just sort of think of a salmon, think of salmon swimming upstream. This is not going to be an easy job. There's no magic, easy, quick, fast way to do this. Everything requires your attention, your commitment to it, and towards seeing it through. The second one is really making sure that, and it goes back to some of the other points we were making, make sure that you have the right ingredients, okay? Just think of baking a cake or baking bread. You know, you can't bake bread with sand right? You got to have flour. You got to have the right things. You got to have the right ideas. So making sure that whatever idea that you're presenting to the public, that you have the necessary ingredients, the components, to be able to communicate it effectively. Try to anticipate some of the questions that people are going to have about the initiative. You don't want to be in front of people and have them keep asking questions, say, oh, I haven't thought about that. I don't know. I don't really know the answer. I mean, good PR people will kind of put an idea through the gambit, right? They will have it run, they'll run it through its course before it is presented to the public, so they can try to anticipate a lot of the questions. And that will help, it just strengthens the policy by having the right ingredients. The right ingredients, you might have a great idea, but how does it get then implemented as public policy? And what effects does it have on people? All of that goes into making sure you've got the right ingredients. You got to think about teamwork. Think about a baseball team or a soccer team. People don't operate as independent individual actors. Everyone who you're relying on to help communicate this idea or policy with the public, you all have to be on board, right? You all have to be on the same team. You have to be working toward the same goals. It only takes one or two stray voices of authority, who are supposed to be or are perceived to be in your court. Having them kind of go off the reservation, having them say things that either are incorrect or they don't know, they're not familiar with it. And it weakens the perception of the idea among the public. And it causes, it makes it harder for you to achieve that winning coalition. I think you have to, we have this saying in the U.S., I don't know if your guests have heard of it, we call it sometimes putting lipstick on a pig.
It's it's been a very popular statement as of late.
Yeah, you got to dress it up a little bit. Now, here's where I would issue one caution. When you're presenting ideas to the public or talking to the media, dressing up an idea does not mean lying. The major mistake that people have made many times is in lying to or misleading the public about an idea or communicating things that later on are proven to be false. If you go in deliberately trying to mislead the public, you're going to be exposed. Your idea is going to fail. You might achieve victory in the short term, but in the end, that policy is going to fall apart. So what I mean by dressing something up, it means present it in a way that people can understand it. That you've got the key selling points highlighted as part of your presentation. It's like the lead in a newspaper. The same is true for communication strategy. Don't bury the lead. Make sure people know fundamentally what it is that you're trying to achieve. And then I think the last of those ingredients, really, think about a broken record.
Right.
I know broken records are a broken CD. What do? They skip. They repeat. That's what you have to do with communication strategies. Be like a broken record. You cannot assume, nor should you ever assume, because it's a recipe for disaster, that if you say it one time, that people got it, that they understand it, that you've done your job. It is not true. They must hear it over and over and over again. It's not because they don't understand it. People are busy. Your idea might be the most important idea that has ever been conceived in your mind, but to the other people in society, the vast majority of people have busy lives, raising their families, doing their jobs. So they need to hear it over and over and over again. Also, it helps to ensure that you're reaching that winning coalition. If people hear it once, it's an interesting idea. If they hear it again in a different context, they recall, I heard that before. Wow, this is catching on. All these things sort of go toward the image of an effective policy. And that is one that you've heard more than one time in more than one place.
Do you feel that by reaching your coalition and actually tailoring the message to that group, that those within the coalition are then able to sell it to other people outside of it?
Well,
If you do a good job?
if you do a good job, absolutely they will be, and that's what you ought to be. You know, it's a great point. I mean, you want to be building loyalists, if you will. You want to be building people who can, you can't do it on your own. You have to build a group of people who can then build another group of people, who can then build another group of people. That's ultimately what coalitions are about. One person can never achieve, rarely does one person ever achieve, sort of major change within public policy. I mean, think about, even in American society, think of some of the landmark achievements. Your mind goes back to people like Martin Luther King. Just to sort of see change in American politics. We often associate one person with it, but realize, picture for instance Martin Luther King's the Million Man March or Million Person March, that, you know, where he clearly could not have done that if you're just one person sort of hammering on the doors of Congress. It took that sight of, you know, tens of thousands of people on the National Mall, all asking for the same thing, to ultimately convince Congress that there's a winning coalition out there, that there is a majority of people, at least a very strong plurality of people who support this, so I better get behind it.
How do you select the individuals within your organization who are actually going to speak on the behalf of the policy or the politician?
Well, generally the person should have some level of expertise on it, especially if it's something highly technical. People like me, you can build the backdrop and build the image components, sometimes better than others. You have some greater successes than others. But people don't come to a spokesperson necessarily for the sort of intricate details of a policy. If you're communicating trade policy, for example, you want to have people who are recognized as experts, people who have some authority in that. If you're communicating criminal justice policies, then you probably want an attorney or a judge or a member of the legislature who has written policy like that. Generally, you want to sort of establish the expertise of the spokesperson.
But you're not just putting anybody up there or letting all necessarily.
Well, it depends.
You're trying to control the message, correct?
Absolutely. It depends on what the message is. If my message is on nuclear physics, then you're not going to have one who has a communications background. I can give you the high points, the sort of broad perspectives of an administration on that, in much the same way that the press secretary does for the President of the United States. But really, if your subject becomes much more specific than what you might get in a soundbite, you need to have experts with who can speak to it with authority.